Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me just say that we get it. Personal development can be hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Project Endure has been on a mission to create a supportive and inspiring community of people, all striving to be better together. Head down to the link in the show notes and join the Hard Things Club so that we can do hard things together. And if you're already a member, invite a friend and spread the love. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 72. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very special guest in Minnesota, Elena Smale. Elena, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. We got connected through two previous podcast guests, Alex Zahner and Zach Donahue, both incredible humans. And one thing I've learned time and time again is that good people know good people. And so I'm here with a good person, and I would love for you to just start off by introducing yourself to everybody who's listening in whatever way feels right.
Awesome. Yes. So like you said, my name's Elena Smale. I go by Elevate by Elena on my Instagram page, and I am a self-love and codependency coach. So I have one-on-one clients that I work with on building the relationship with themselves and helping guide them along in their own healing journeys. I also am a full-time general manager actually at the fitness studio that Alex and Zach both work at. So that's kind of how we met. And that takes up a lot of my time too. But honestly, I'm kind of the person that likes to have her hat in a lot of different arenas. And I am a very multi-passionate person. So I do a lot of things like with my Elevate by Elena page. I have a book club that I host. I'm actually starting my own podcast as well in January. I do events for my coaching and things like that. So I'm kind of like all over the place, but that's kind of how I like it to be because it keeps me busy and it keeps me energized and feeling fulfilled in my life.
It sounds like you do a lot of creating. You put a lot out into the world, energy, effort, ideas, etc. Do you also spend a lot of time consuming to get the ideas, to have the inspiration, or are you solely on the creation side?
It's a really good question. I have recently actually cut back on consumption because I'm trying to tap more into my own intuition and not get distracted by other outside sources, because I really want my ideas to be fresh and be authentic and come from myself personally and not necessarily be inspired or copying someone else. I like inspiration and I'll still scroll on Instagram here and there, but I try to really just come from the heart and come from my own experiences, because I think that's the best way that I'm able to authentically show up as myself, and then also have my content resonate with the right people and attract the right people into my worlds.
It's so interesting. I'm going to go in a direction that'll make this come full circle, but Zach and Alex on their podcast episodes both mentioned childhood and talked about our inner child. And you use the word intuition, which I think is a lost art or a skill that a lot of us have trouble accessing in the world that we live in. And the other word that came to mind for me was imagination. Another thing that I think we lose as we get older, especially in the world that we live in. Both of those things, intuition and imagination, in my experience, have been very strong in childhood. And so where along the way do you feel like people lose those things?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, like you said, it's you have those things as you're a child. And then once you start to get into puberty and you start hearing outside things of how you should live your life, whether that be from your parents or even teachers in school, society, I think those things start to change, especially in like junior high and high school, because you're also trying to fit in. And we don't want to necessarily stand out because we as humans are wanting connection. Like that's like an innate thing that we have like built within each and every one of us. We want to connect, we want to belong. And so we have to fit in this certain little box. But once we start doing that, we start to get really disconnected from our true authentic selves. And that's where we kind of lose the imagination and the intuition because we become detached from ourselves and what we are truly supposed to be showing up as and like what our true purpose is in life. So yeah, I think it's when we start to like develop that cognition of like, okay, well now I need to figure out, and I don't know exactly what age that is, but I know it's around like junior high, high school that we need to like figure out how to fit in. And then that's when you start to become really detached from your own imagination and like your own unique qualities and like quirks almost. And then you start to like either refine them again in your like adulthood, or you just remain detached and from your intuition and from your imagination and that creativity.
Yeah, I agree with that. It makes me think of this quote, and I don't know who said it, but it goes, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. And you might need if you're listening to the podcast, rewind 15 seconds and re-listen to that. But just the concept of, at a certain point, it's easy to get lost, and you're not who you think you are. You're not who you think other people think you are. You are who you think other people think that you think you are. And it's this very complicated, complex thought process. But I think at the end of the day, the point is simple. It's easy to lose yourself by trying to fit in with the crowd. So, with that being said, Elena, I would love to hear your definitions of self love and codependency, because those are terms that get thrown around. Maybe self love in my circle more so than codependency. But just to set the stage, what do both of those mean to you?
Yeah, self-love is truly learning to love and like every single part of yourself. That being, of course, like the strengths that you have, but also the shadows and the things that make up your quirks and make you, who you are. But like we sometimes discount, or we think it's like an issue or like something that's bad about us, but it's like fully accepting every single part of yourself, and also learning to trust yourself along the way and be able to follow your intuition so that you can live your life as authentically as you possibly can. That's my definition of self-love. It's kind of like a long-winded answer. Codependency is when you lose yourself in relationships. So I think, again, there's a lot of different ways that you can lose yourself. And codependency, we kind of talked about like the intuition and the imagination as you grow up. But I also think you lose yourself because codependency is like a very prevalent thing in our society. And it actually stems a lot like in my own family and like generation to generation. But it's where you lose your identity because you rely on other people for external validation. You kind of transform your personality into who you think they want, or like who you think, what you think they want you to be, essentially. And yeah, you lose yourself along the way because you're trying to be someone that you're not and trying to give all of yourself to someone else. And you don't focus on your own needs. So you're never able to like fully fill up your cup and fill this void that you have within yourself.
Hmm. I appreciate those definitions. And I have a feeling that some of that will come up through our conversation. I have two quotes. One is from Dr. Seuss, who once said, be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter and those who matter won't mind. And then the other is from Margaret Mead, who said, always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. And I think sometimes we wish away the quirks. I wrote a blog a few years back about a confession that I had, which was really just that I folded my dirty laundry. So this is for people listening, this is blowing your mind right now. I actually don't do this currently, but rewind 2 years, I would wear an article of clothing, I would take it off, I would fold it and then place it in a laundry basket because it just made me feel better. And that was something that until I put it out there to the world, I was kind of embarrassed by. And
Mhm.
now I love it about myself. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I think that's awesome. I've never personally done that, but I love that you do that and like you have whatever reason for doing it, but I think that's great. And there's probably a lot of like random quirks that I probably can't think of off the top of my head right now,
Mm,
but I like subconsciously do. And I think that's like honestly what makes people so interesting. And I love honestly learning those things about people and like
yeah.
why they do the things that they do and like what makes them like tick and how they think about certain things.
Mm.
Psychology is just another really like big passion of mine. So I think that's why I do a lot of what I do because I work with people one on one. I like build relationships through fitness and I love connecting with people in any way that I can because I think people are really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I do a lot of similar work in the one-on-one nature, the coaching, the guiding, the being there with people as they figure it out. Because I don't think I have answers for anybody. I think people have answers for themselves, and maybe part of my job is to help them find those answers.
I agree.
Um, and like I view every relationship, it's a book I've never read, it's a movie I've never seen. It is so interesting to me, and it's such a privilege to get to walk with people on their paths. And I feel like I walk away from every single conversation with every single client just a little bit better off because I've either learned something about them, learned something about myself, or just learned something about the world in general. And I take that with me to each new interaction. It's really special.
Yeah, I honestly completely agree with what you said. I go into like my own sessions with people, like, and it's really not about me giving them the answers. It's about like guiding them to use their own intuition. There's that word again, to figure out what they need for themselves. And yeah, I think I've learned so much more about myself, and I think I've almost grown more since I started working with people because I like have my own epiphanies and like things come together once like I see it from a different perspective and I'm able to like see it from like the outside of like how someone else is dealing with something. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I've dealt with that or I've never thought about it that way. And you can gain that from so many different conversations you have with people, but especially when you're working with people that struggle with things that you personally struggled with, those things like really come up to the surface. And it's just,
Yeah.
I like geek out over like growing as an individual. I'm sure you do too, like learning and like becoming a better version of myself. So like when those things come to the surface, it's like really exciting. It like lights me up and fires me up
Yeah,
personally.
me too. Me too.
Yeah.
And to go off of that, one of my favorite parts about this podcast is that a lot of those same things happen for me in these conversations. I make connections. I have these moments where I have this realization where something clicks. And my hope is that the same holds true for the people listening to this podcast. And one of the reasons I love it so much is because we talk about real things like struggle, hardship, adversity. How do people navigate that? How do people overcome that? How do people learn about themselves in the world through that? And so, with that, let me ask you the first question, which is what is the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle in life? So, a circumstance that you didn't necessarily get to choose for yourself.
Yeah, the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with personally, and this is where a lot of my conversations like stem from, and honestly, where a lot of like what I do now comes from, is when I had gotten out of college and I was trying to kind of figure out like what I wanted to do with my life. It's like that adulting stage where you're like trying to figure it out and like you majored in marketing, but it's like, do I actually really like marketing? I had to like make that decision when I was so young and I didn't really know what my true passions were or like what actually lights me up. So I went through this phase where, first of all, I felt really lost because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And second of all, I felt really lost in who I was and my identity, like as a person just showing up in this world. And it came back to like that codependency. I kept losing myself in relationships, hadn't quite figured out what I really wanted out of life in general. So I just felt like very like hopeless and confused. And so I didn't know what to do from that point. Like that's the lowest I've definitely felt in like my whole life. And so people always talk about like going to therapy. It's like, okay, well, that seemed like the only option for me at that point because I didn't really, I was so confused. I'm like, I don't even know where to start here. So I started going to therapy, and that brought a lot of like this codependency and this self-worth stuff that I had to work through to the surface, and just made me a lot more self-aware. And I started to figure out like how I actually do interact in relationships, and maybe what I do actually want out of my life and out of relationships. So it was like this whole like realization of like, I'm so low right now, I need some help. And then also growing along the way and like taking in all the stuff that like goes on in therapy and like processing all the emotions. And like I had to grieve a lot of things too. Like I, at the same time, I didn't even mention this, but my parents were also separating. I had just finished college. It was a lot of change all at once. And so I had to grieve certain like relationships, like with my mom, because things had changed between the way like we had interacted before college and now, and like not in a bad way, but things just change. And so like I had to grieve that relationship, and that was a big deal for me. I had to grieve the loss of like my parents being together as a couple, and like all of that comes with that, like traditions and just being a family unit, and having to see them like start dating new people and like how to process that. And then alongside that, it was like I was also in a relationship at the time and all the things that came along with that. So it was just a lot of change, a lot of like things being brought up to the surface and processing. And it was a very difficult time for me, but also like made me into who I am today.
One, thank you for sharing that. Two, it's cool to hear that that hard time or that hard season shaped you into who you are today.
Mhm.
Um, and three, I'd love to ask a follow-up question just throughout all of that time. Was there ever a period where you stepped back from being in a relationship to be by yourself so that you could figure all this out?
Yes, definitely. I ended up ending that relationship. It wasn't a very long relationship, but that's kind of just like where everything came to a head. So that relationship is like a very monumental time for me for some reason, even though we only dated for a couple months, but it's like where everything like really just like I said, came to a head, and I had to like figure it out. And I started processing that relationship and the way I interacted with him like during my therapy sessions. And that ended because it was not a very good situation. So from that point on, I honestly have been like technically single and working on myself, but I've had like, I don't know if you call them like situationships. I've been committed to people in a way and like exclusive, but I haven't had like a title with anyone literally since then, which is crazy to think. But that was also when like probably 4 years ago at this point. So
Hmm.
I've been working on myself, and I've been figuring out like how to show up better for myself and like grow on my self-worth and my relationship with myself so that I can show up better in new relationships. But also you don't really get to work through some of that stuff until you actually are in a relationship again, which I've realized as I've dated people along the way and things haven't worked out. But I've gotten better in each relationship that I have been in, and I've learned a lot from them. So I don't regret anything that I've been through, but there has been a lot of periods of singleness since then. Yes.
Yeah. So, a couple thoughts. One, if anybody is nodding their head in agreement with anything that Elena is saying, I would highly recommend going to her social media and consuming some of her content. Two, Natalie Bell was episode 56 on this podcast, and we touched on a lot of similar topics. So, maybe a different perspective. And then, third, I guess, in my own, this is the love life of Joe. I've had two girlfriends in my entire life. One was in high school. And then there was about, if I do the math, a long gap, let's say, very long gap. And then there's my wife. Um, and in between that time, it was a lot of me being by myself, cutting out some friendships, cutting out alcohol in my case, cutting out a lot of things that were clouding my judgment. And I didn't realize that I was doing that because I wanted clarity for myself, but I was. And so I don't know what my life would be like if I didn't do that, if I didn't have that alone time to work on myself, to be by myself, to be with myself. And I'm wondering for you if you think there's a way to do all of this work without being alone, because I'm sure there's somebody listening who's maybe in a relationship and is some things are coming up and they're like, oh, well, like I feel like I need to work on these things. Do I need to be alone? What do you say to them?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I feel like it's very like situational
Yeah.
because I would say yes, you could work on these things when you're in a relationship. However, if you are working on the things that I personally was struggling with, like codependency, self-worth, self-love, like all that ties into that, you're probably in a relationship that is not serving you and you have some, codependent tendencies in, and that's really hard to just change a whole relationship if you're working on yourself with this person that actually is like just not a good match for you. So it's like, okay, well, there's that whole thing of like attracting the right people too. And if like you haven't like learned the things that you need to learn and have done that work on yourself, then you might not be with the right person. However, if you are in a healthy relationship and you have good boundaries and you have really good communication with your partner too, because when you're working through stuff like this, there's going to be so many things that come to the surface and things that trigger you and things that you're going to have to process and like kind of understand, like, why is that coming up for me? And communicate that with your partner and not like take it out on them. That is going to be something that's like really important if you're actually going to do the work while you're with someone else.
Yeah. And as you said, it depends
Yeah.
for anybody listening. So maybe if you're in that gray area and you're not sure, reach out to Elena and pick her brain a bit. But the topic of self worth is not something that I've talked about extensively on this podcast. We've brushed on it in various episodes, but I'd be curious. One, what is what does your self worth look like? What comprises Elena's self worth? And we can go from there, but let's start with that.
Like currently, what is my self worth?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
putting you on the spot.
you are. You are. I would say my self worth is based on, and I've kind of said this a couple of times already, but it's like how well I show up as authentically as myself each and every day and not letting other people cloud my judgment, other people's opinions get in the way. Um, really like living my life true to myself and not worrying what other people think and not losing myself in relationships and just really being this independent, confident, grounded human that also attracts really amazing people into their life and like can elevate themselves in other areas is like their career and like their relationships and just everything that comes with life. I feel like there's more to it, but that's what's coming to mind right now.
Yeah, no, it resonates and actually makes me think of something Brene Brown once said, and that is you either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness.
100.
And it can be exhausting to hustle for your worthiness. And the thing that I took away from what you said and from what Brene Brown said and just my own experience is that the best self-worth comes from the inside and isn't attached to things on the outside. um
I think it does come a lot to the sharing your story and like actually authentically sharing it and not trying to like form it into what you think other people want to hear or letting other belief systems get in the way of what you actually believe and like what your true values are.
have you ever this is kind of rhetorical because I think we all have, but have you ever been caught in a lie? Like it could be a small one, but
Yeah.
yeah, you bend the truth and then, you have to kind of remember what you said and you have to, right? That's like not a good feeling at all. And I think in a way, when we are inauthentic to who we truly are on the inside, when we try to fit in with other people and we're not we're not our true authentic self, like in a way there that same thing is at play, right? Like we are in a way lying to the world, and we have to keep up with the appearance, and we have to live with that tension of not actually being the person that we know we want to be. And that's hard.
It is. It's something that comes up for me with that whole like lying and the way you show up is like the whole concept of like, okay, when someone asks you, how are you? Do you actually respond with how you are? Or do you just say good because that's like what's normalized and like what everyone just says because they're not going to like dive deep into like their true feelings. So that's like something that I think about, especially being like in the fitness studio space. Like when people come up to me, I have to kind of like a little bit put on a persona because like it is a business and I'm not going to be like unprofessional by any means. But with like people that I actually am close with and like I've built friendships and relationships through the gym, it's like people ask me how I am and like I try to give as honest and truthful as an answer as I can. I mean, usually I'm pretty good, so like it's not an issue, but like there are days where I'm like struggling and I'll be like, it's just been like a busy day, like there's a lot going on, like I try to be as authentic and as honest as I can, but I think this is like a thing that people struggle with. I don't know if they'd even consider it a struggle, but it's like something that's in our society that's like very normal to just be like, hey, how are you? It's kind of like a greeting, but then like, do you respond authentically? Majority of the time, probably not.
Yeah, yeah. I recently had this experience where I was having trouble communicating with this group of people that I'm connected with, and I'll just keep this vague, but I was not feeling heard or seen or valued in the way that I wanted to. And this one person from this group reached out to me, and we had a conversation, and they empathized, they listened. I felt heard, I felt seen, I felt cared for, and it felt so good. And I think a lot of times we go through life and we don't give the true answer, to how are you doing? And we keep our feelings inside, and we don't live out our true authentic lives. And we, as a result, don't feel seen or heard or cared for. And that's also a really challenging way to go through life, you know?
It is. It's
Yeah.
like this temporary, like easy way out to just be like, yeah, I'm good. Because it's like people like the temporary, like quick things because they don't want to have to actually process their emotions all the time. Like I'm speaking like in a general sense, but people don't usually love to feel the tough feelings or be vulnerable and actually express that to someone else because it is kind of scary. Like if you are actually having a bad day and you are like opening up to someone about that, it's like you are like fully open and exposed. And that's like again like that's like a whole Brene Brown thing, like she talks so much about vulnerability, but it's like yeah, I think people struggle with being vulnerable, and part of being authentic and like showing up as yourself every day is like you have to be vulnerable because you are going to be showing your true self to other people, and people might not like you. And that's another thing people struggle with, is like they want to be liked by everyone, but like that's impossible if you're actually being who you're supposed to be. Even if you're not being who you're supposed to be, people aren't going to like you like all of the time. It's just impossible. And it's like something you just have to let go of. Like you want the control of like people liking, it's like that people pleaser tendency, but it's not how life is supposed to be lived.
Yeah. I've got another Brene Brown quote for
There
you.
we go.
She said, what's the greater risk? Letting go of what people think, or letting go of how I feel, what I believe, and who I am? That's really powerful.
It is. She is like one of my faves. She has so many quotable things that she says. And like, honestly, I've read the majority of her books. And there's just always so many good nuggets that I can get out of her thoughts and her stories and the way she speaks about vulnerability and
Mm,
shame and self-worth and all of that.
yeah.
I honestly would recommend her to like anyone who is on their own self-love and healing journey because she is very inspiring and very powerful.
Yeah, she's a rock star. Brene, I know you listen to the podcast, so thanks for your work. Appreciate you.
Maybe she can be on next time.
Yeah, well, it's a long list, but Brene, we'll get you on.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah. And the other thing on that is I think so often, and I've been in this place, and I'm sure most people have, if not everyone, so often we are working next to people. We are living next to people. We are living with people. We are communicating with people who are going through something really hard while we are also going through something really hard. And we both pretend like it's fine. And neither of us know how much the other person's hurting. And if one person just stepped up and opened up and chose to be vulnerable, the other person would also feel comfortable enough and safe enough to open up and be vulnerable. And both parties would be so much better off.
Yes. That's the other thing that one of the other things that she talks about, Brene Brown, is when we are vulnerable, it gives the other people around you a chance to be vulnerable and know that they're also not alone in that. And it actually builds connection and builds rapport, and you build your relationships and trust and bonding with people actually through hard times and through those challenging conversations and being vulnerable. So it's like if you actually want to have like these deep relationships and meaningful relationships, it all stems from being vulnerable with the other person. And it's just such a cool thing. If you can think about it that way, it's like I want to like grow in this relationship and I want this to be a very meaningful connection for me. So with that, I need to be vulnerable, even though it's scary, but it just opens up the door for so many other amazing things on the other side if you can just break through that vulnerability and do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easier said than done, but very
Absolutely.
worthwhile. And also I think once you do it once, it just becomes a little bit easier to do it a second time and a third time, so on and so forth.
Like a
Uh
muscle. Like if you actually work it and like try to have those, even those tough conversations, like those get easier over time the more that you have them. It's the same thing with like being vulnerable and being open to share your story with others. It gets easier each and every time.
oh, I love the fitness analogies. That's
Right.
perfect. So with that being said, we started off by talking about something that you didn't choose. We ended up talking about being vulnerable, which is hard and a choice. But Elena, what's the hardest thing that you have ever done on purpose? And why have you chosen to do that thing?
Yeah. The hardest thing I've ever had to do on purpose is start my own business, because with that, it's like I am fully being vulnerable and like putting myself out there and knowing that I very much so could fail and it could be in the eyes of so many other people. And I think there's so many, I don't even have like a specific quote. You probably do, but with like entrepreneurship, how it's actually like if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it's like the most growth you're ever going to probably do in your life as like a person. Like you just develop so much as a person because you have to when you have your own business and like are learning along the way. And it's not something for everyone because like I said, like you have to go through a lot of growth to become a person that can build a successful business and can attract the right people and can be abundant with their mindset and the things that are coming into their lives, and also build on the skills that they have and build on connections with people. Like there's so many aspects to entrepreneurship, but I just knew I needed to do something for myself. And like I had this like internal passion and purpose that needed to be shared with other people, and I needed to serve other people. And that was like the best way that I could see that coming through to fruition. So that is definitely the hardest thing I've ever chosen to do, because there's some stat of like, honestly, like most businesses fail. I think it's like honestly like 90 or 95% of businesses fail. So if you can just imagine that, like getting into entrepreneurship, it's not for the faint of heart, let's just say. And I'm sure you can completely relate to that.
Oh, I can relate so much to that. I do have a quote, not
Mhm.
directly tied to entrepreneurship, but I do think that it'll speak to the experience of entrepreneurship. So this is from Alan Alda, who said, "You can't get there by bus, only by hard work and risk And by not quite knowing what you're doing, what you'll discover will be wonderful. What you'll discover will be yourself. And I feel like entrepreneurship is just personal growth wrapped up in business, pretty much.
Literally. Yes. Like a little present of what you just said. And it's funny because I feel like, yeah, I've done all these other things in my life. Like I got a marketing degree and I never like went into corporate or anything with that. But I'm like essentially using my business degree and all of the things that I have been passionate about, like growing and learning and my curiosity and all the experiences that I've been through. And that's like my little present that I like put out into the world as an entrepreneur to help serve other people. And hopefully they can learn to, create their own um, life and like live out their own purpose for themselves and feel elevated in that too.
That's a beautiful mission. What was it that drew you to entrepreneurship in the first place? And what did it actually look like to start your business?
I think I've also just been surrounded by it in my life. So I have to give some of the credit to like my parents because they both are entrepreneurs. And so I like grew up from a young age, like being around other entrepreneurs. Like my mom has had a daycare center since I was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old. And she has other businesses that she owns now too. And then my dad has had multiple companies too, and he owns a consulting company right now as well. So I've just been like around it my whole life. And I like business. I actually like marketing and I like it because it's basically like the business version of psychology because you have to learn how the consumer mind works. And so like psychology is all about just like a normal person's mind, like how does that work? And so I honestly got into it because I kind of lost your question, honestly. Can
Oh,
you
that
rewind?
doesn't matter. Yeah, I think the question was just, what drew you to entrepreneurship? And I think you answered that and you were
Yeah.
surrounded by it. And then what did it look like to start your business? What was
Yeah.
the first thing that you did to start your business?
What it looked like was honestly like starting an Instagram page and like putting myself out there on a platform where people could see me and like I think I started it out more so like, okay, I need to like check all of these boxes. Like, I need to get my LLC. I need to get branding photos done. I need to think of a name. But it's like, I think people think of business as just like all of these like little like minute details. But it's like, no, like actually, what is like the purpose and what's my vision for the company? And honestly, that took me a while to get to because I've pivoted quite a few times in my own business. I just knew I wanted to serve people. I knew I wanted to work one on one with people. I knew I wanted other people to grow and me to be a part of that process with them. And so I think it was like changing my mindset around that too. It's like, okay, all these other like little factors, yeah, they matter, but it's like, okay, if as long as I'm like living out my purpose and like what I'm supposed to be doing and serving other people, then I'm going to feel fulfilled. And that's truly like how I started my business was like creating my vision and like just making everything match and be in alignment with my purpose.
That's a great way of putting it. I mean, I went through the same thing when I started my business. I sat down, I had the checklist. It was the LLC, it was QuickBooks, it was how do you track all these things? And the truth is, none of that would matter if there wasn't a mission or a purpose driving it all. And the other thing I'll say is people see, from the outside what you're doing or what I'm doing, and probably assume at times that it's all neat and tidy and that you have it all together. And I'll speak for myself. It is not. Behind the scenes is chaos at times. And it all comes together in this beautiful way to allow both of us to do what we desire to do, to help other people, to serve other people, to live out the mission. But it's not pretty. It's not organized all the time. It's not easy, but it's worth it.
Always, always worth it. And honestly, the chaos, like it gives me life. And I feel like there is, like you said, it kind of just all works the way you want it to. Like when you're in alignment, everything just like flows in the way it's supposed to. Even if it seems chaotic from the outside, it all works out the way it's supposed to. And it's just the most fulfilling thing possible. So I never regret starting my own company and like doing something for myself and being able to serve people in that way. I'm sure you can probably relate to that too.
Yeah, 100%. I have just a curious question. As a business owner, what is your least favorite part of running a business?
Least favorite part. I've been like actually thinking about this a little bit lately because it's like once I start getting to the point where like I want this to be my full-time thing, it's not right now. I'm working my way up and I love all the other things that I do in my life, but it's like, how can I start like eventually pushing some of the things I don't enjoy off onto someone else who's like way better at it? And honestly, it's interesting because we talked about creation and I love creating, but there's certain parts of creation that I don't necessarily like. Like I don't have the eye for like necessarily like an aesthetic. Like I can like appreciate an aesthetic, but I feel like I can't create that as like easily as like some other people can. So it's like the design aspect. I would just love to like push that onto someone else that like is way better at it than me and like doesn't take as long for me to like figure out. Because I love like the content behind it. Like I love like creating like, okay, what's like the caption, like what's like my email going to be, like what is like for an event, like what are we going to like discuss and what's going to be a part of the event versus like the actual design aspects for it and like all like the pretty things that go along with it. That part is like it's my least favorite because it doesn't come as naturally for me. I just have to like work harder at it, which I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. Cause like there's always good things that come through like pushing through the tough things and like growing in that way. But yeah, I think that's part of it. And then also just like I kind of like figuring things out on my own, but I feel like I have to do so much research. Like,
Yeah.
especially I'm sure like starting a podcast, it's like I'm Googling things constantly and like figuring things out as I go. So it's like a lot of trial and error. Um, but I don't necessarily hate it because that's kind of just the way my brain works. Like I just kind of want to figure things out and like see how it goes for me. And yeah. What about you? I'm curious.
It's a good question. Honestly, I think it would have to be. So this is going to sound off, but I'll explain. It's the outreach part. It's as a business owner, obviously you want to create new connections, you want to generate leads, you want to create partnerships, etc. I genuinely enjoy getting on the phone with people, listening to people's stories, seeing where I can add value and building those relationships. But I really dislike the volume aspect of that game. And when it comes to generating leads or creating partnerships, there's a lot of behind the scenes footwork that goes into legwork, not footwork, that goes into identifying who is the right person to reach out to for this company? Like what contacts do we use? How do I narrow down what people might be good leads for my business? And I don't enjoy that aspect, the research and the volume aspect, but I love connecting with people. So double-edged sword there. I do have someone who helps me with that, and that's been a huge weight off my shoulders. But yeah, I would say the volume aspect of that. So
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, that makes total sense. Like, I don't ever feel like I like to like, I don't like to be like salesy. I don't know if well, there's salespeople out there, so there's got to be people that like it. But yes, it's like that reaching out to people and like, I don't know, going out of my way to create connections instead of it just being like a fluid.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't love like small talk. Like, I want to get into like the nitty gritty and like the deep conversation. So when I have to do that, I know it's part of like the game and I know it's part of business, but
Yeah.
yeah, I can definitely relate on that.
And I'll add this in just because I think it could help a lot of people because it helped me reframe how I look at sales. I used to think sales was a dirty word and just a terrible thing, and I hated it. And I read this book by Daniel Pink. It's called To Sell is Human. And I realized that sales is really just relationship building. And when there is value that I can add to another person and it matches their need and all the other parameters fit, then that's a sale. And when I looked at it through that lens, I realized one, I wanted to add value to people without asking for anything in return, because that fills my cup. I feel like I'm serving people, and by doing that, I give people a taste of what value I could add to them further in a coaching capacity or business capacity. And if it's the right fit for them, when they're interested and when the time is right, they will reach out to me. And if not, I will never pressure anybody. I will never say, hey, let's hop on a call to talk about coaching if they don't bring it up first. And I feel like that strategy of just adding value, building relationships, and also making it known what I do through my social media presence and online, it's just been such a great recipe and it takes all the pressure off. And so that's kind of how I look at sales, but everybody does it differently.
Yeah. No, I really like that perspective. And I feel like I have a similar mindset now, especially like, I mean, we make sales too, like in the fitness arena, like we have to sell memberships kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And I never liked it at first because it felt like I was, yeah, selling to someone and like asking them to join on. But now that I've like shifted my perspective more into like, okay, I'm just building a connection with someone and like making them feel comfortable. And if they're meant to be a part of my community here, like it will work out the way it's supposed to. It's like having faith in the process and like having faith that the right people will be for you and then the other people will not be. And it's not that big of a deal. It is more about like that relationship building and creating connection and then attracting the people that are meant for you.
Yeah. And then to bring it full circle for the people who are business minded, and then I promise we'll get off this topic. That's why the volume aspect is so important for me as business owner, because I am not aggressive with the way that I attack sales. It's more of a long term, if you want to call it passive process, although I'm very engaged. So it requires numbers, it requires patience, and it requires persistence. And so that's where the volume comes in. But to transition away from that, Elena, this is called the Project Endure podcast. And I'm curious for you, what comes to mind when you hear the word endurance?
Endurance to me is having that strength and that courage to push through like resistance and to grow as a human along the way.
Mm. I think it's interesting hearing all these different definitions because I ask every guest this question, and there's this common theme of resistance
Mm.
oftentimes. And it almost feels like you can't have endurance without resistance. Do you think it's possible to have endurance without some kind of force pushing back against you?
Honestly, no, I don't, if we're being honest. I think it's like either resistance or it's like getting out of your comfort zone or if it's fear. But like to endure is actually to push through. It's like what you talk about. It's like doing the hard things. It's like pushing through the uncomfortable feelings, the fear to get to the other side of it. And like it's just constantly doing things like that in your life that builds the endurance. It's like constantly putting yourself out of your comfort zone so that you can grow. There's no other way to build endurance. Like you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone and out of your limits a little bit to be able to make progress and to build that endurance and that stamina.
I agree with that. And fitness is something we have in common. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one of my favorite parallels to life because the same holds true. If you want to get stronger, if you want to improve your endurance, if you want to get better in that realm, you can't do it without pushing resistance. You can't do it without doing something challenging because if you don't have that stimulus, you'll never have that growth. And yeah, I love what you said. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question, honestly. Have
Thanks.
you ever asked that question specifically to anyone else?
That's a good question. And no, I haven't. But I would imagine just quickly rewinding in my mind through all of the conversations, I would have to guess that every guest would answer very similarly, if not the same to you. I just don't see a world where you can have endurance without resistance. Um,
Yes.
so, all right, we're going to transition here to my favorite question, and it is the final question.
Okay.
People listening to this podcast are coming from all different places. They are in different seasons of life, writing different chapters of different books. But one thing is for sure Everybody has been, is going through, or will go through something challenging. And right now, you have the opportunity to speak to somebody who is going through a challenging season of life, who maybe doesn't know what to do or where to turn, and they're just feeling a little bit stuck, lost, and maybe even discouraged. What would you say to that person listening right now?
I would say to that person that it's not a bad thing to ask for help, and you aren't a burden when you ask for help. I think that's like a common belief among people that are struggling, or like we said, like have codependent tendencies or are people pleasers. They think that they're a burden when they ask for help because they're so used to just giving themselves away to other people and not focusing on their own needs. And it is, like I said, like a human innate thing for us to have connection and like need that. It's like part of like who we are to our core. And so like knowing that like we can't live in this world and in this society and in this life without other people and without other people's help. And that also makes us a better person along the way, and it makes us stronger when we can lean on other people for support, not be dependent on other people, because that's like not the right thing. But it's okay to ask for help when we actually need it, and there are people in your life, or maybe that you need to meet, that will support you, like a mentor, a coach, a therapist. There are people out there that are there for you and that will serve you and help you guide you out of whatever uncomfortable situation you're in, or any lost feelings that you have, or depression. Ask for help.
That's a great point. And just to reiterate, if you ask for help, you're not a burden. I think that's such an important message for somebody out there, if not many people out there to hear, myself included at times, because it can feel like that. And I think the other thing that you said, which was very, very quick, but I picked up on it. You said that there are people you know or people you don't know yet or will meet, right? And like that's so important because if you don't feel supported in your circle, if you don't have that person or those people to go to right now, it doesn't mean you will never find them. They are out there. And I would venture to guess that Elena is one of them. I know that I'm one of them.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to reach out because you never know what good can come out of that.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, you did say it better yourself. And then I just added on to the end. Um, I do want to share a quick story to just accentuate that last point. I wrote a blog a few years ago where I pretty much said that. I said, I'm here for you. I said, I might not know you. I don't know how you came across this blog, but I'm here for you. And I mean that. Here's my cell phone number. And I put my cell phone number out on the internet for
Yeah.
about 2 minutes before I got a text from a friend who said, hey, you probably shouldn't do that. So they recommended, which was actually a great recommendation, create a Google cell phone number and use that number so people don't have your actual cell phone number. I'm glad I did that.
There
Thank you,
you
Matt. Yeah.
go.
So I did that. The first call I got was my brother pretending to be someone else. So prank call.
Yeah.
That was great. But over the past 2 years, I've had countless people text me. And there's this one that stands out to me. And it was this person who I've never met. I never would have come across otherwise. They were going through a tough time. They found my blog on the internet and they texted me and we hopped on a phone call and we talked once. I'm not sure what came out of that for that person or where they ended up going or what they ended up doing, but I felt like it was a really great conversation. And I hope that it was helpful for that person, even just to know that there was a stranger out there on the internet who actually meant it when they said they were there for somebody else. So if you're listening, there are people out there, Elena and myself included.
Wow. That's such a great story. It like inspires me. Like, I want to do that. I'm definitely not going to put my real number out there. That's a good thing to know. But I love that. And I think, I mean, you never know when you're going to like be someone's person that they needed at that certain time in their life. And you don't know the impact that you're making on people each and every day. And like, honestly, just acknowledging people, giving people eye contact, like when you see them like on the street, smiling at them, like those little things, like someone could be in like a really low place at that time, and just like being acknowledged as a human, and that they're like, they matter in a way, and like there's another human out there that noticed them, can change their whole day, and honestly their whole life, depending on where they're at. So never discount those little tiny interactions that you have and the things that you do, because you could be changing people's lives in the process.
Well said. Well said. So Elena, if people want to consume your content, see what you're about, connect with you, follow along with your podcast as it comes out, where's the best place for them to go to find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can follow me. My Instagram is at Elevate by Elena, and it's ELENA for my name. You can also start following my podcast, even though there's no content out there, there's a trailer. So you can start following along, and that's going to be launching in January. And that's called Elevate with Elena. So that's going to be on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts.
Well, I will link those things down in the description so people can follow along and find out more about what you're doing. And I guess the last thing I just want to say, Elena, is thank you. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for all of the work that you're doing. And I'm so excited to follow along with everything that life has in store for you.
Thank you. That means so much coming from you. And honestly, I would say the exact same to you. Like, you are doing so much good for this world, and just even having these conversations with people and putting this out into the world, like, I'm sure it's going to make a difference for so many other people. And I already know you've made a difference in a lot of other people's lives. So thank you for serving and doing what you do as well.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.